All right, everyone, I would like to introduce you to Joe Bauer. And I know Joe because he was one of my coaches in Seattle, and he was also a teammate of mine, and an awesome friend and colleague. And he's here to join us today to talk a little bit about considerations when coaching a master's athlete. For those of you that don't know what that means in the world of CrossFit, it is ages 35 and above. In other sports, they might have a different cutoff line. It might be 40, it might be 50, whatever it is. It basically means you're a little bit more experienced in age, not necessarily the sport. But I'm going to let Joe kind of do a little intro, and we're going to chat about his coaching experience with master's athletes and kind of that journey that he's been on with that.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carla. So I've been coaching in some capacity for the last 20 plus years. Started off with baseball in college and then just ended up loving the whole coaching side of it and training and getting to know people and bettering ourselves through coaching and sports and all that fun stuff. So I've been doing it for a long time without getting into the weeds of it too much, and then got bit by the bug around the same time as Carla, probably, with wanting to compete in CrossFit and going down that road. And then it's always been a passion of mine to teach what I learned. So I'm a big advocate of like, let me go out and make those mistakes, and then let me go teach what I learned so that other people don't have to make those mistakes, or that we can relate about the mistakes that we've made, and then try and figure out a solution that makes us better because of the mistakes that we've made. And I've made a lot of mistakes, so I'm not really necessarily, it's cool to avoid them, but you learn a lot when you make the mistakes. So I guess I've been doing it for a long time, and now I do an online program. So kind of a funny story that I have is I've been living in a van for the last 3 years and traveling around the United States with my now wife, and, used to be a teammate with Carla and myself on our CrossFit endeavors. So I write a program that's based off of what we have used in order to get ourselves in shape, but it also digs into all the things that I've used in the past that have helped people to get better at their lives. So we try and incorporate as much of the things that we're doing actively, as well as things that people can do with a very small amount of equipment, because that's what we have. And then we scale up and down from there. So I think that is it in a nutshell. Plus I geek out on nutrition a lot and recovery.
Yes. I think that could be a whole other few topics of discussion, maybe future things. But I'm diving because I kind of recently, my husband and I kind of on a whim made a trip to the CrossFit Games. I think he was inspired by Joe's story. And unfortunately, we didn't get there in time to watch the Masters athletes end. But I got a text message saying like, hey, we should really be there. And I asked like, do you want to go? Yeah, let's go. And so we ended up going. But long story short, Joe has been coaching his mom. And I'm going to let you kind of tell her background and her story, and how when you told me kind of a funny story about she actually decided that she wanted to try and start doing your programming. So kind of give us the story about the background of coaching your mom through the games.
Yeah. So a little bit further back, even my mom got into CrossFit about 8 years ago. And it was kind of just because she's very supportive of what myself and my brother had done. And we got into CrossFit a little bit before that. So she started coming to like these Saturday family and friends workouts that I was doing, which was really cool. And jumping forward, I guess about 6 years, she decided that she wanted to do it a little bit more competitively, because she'd done the open and she's like, this is interesting. I think she got maybe 32nd or something out of the open in the masters division for the 60 plus a few years back. And I'd always told her, what, like if you wanted to do this competitively, I could help you to do that. There's just, some very easy things that we could start to work on. And for some reason, about 2 years ago, she decided that, I'm going to pick up the programming that Joe and Emily that helps me with write and start doing it on a regular basis. And by regular basis, I just mean like maybe committing a little bit more to like making sure that she's doing it and asking questions and talking more about getting better day to day and recovering a little bit more. So just so you guys know too, my mom has a swimming background and a gymnastics background. She is a fish in the water. So she does have that going for her. And she's just, you know, she's, and myself, we're both just genetically blessed a little bit in that, you know, we come to athletic endeavors and do them pretty well naturally. So there is that component. I don't want to leave that out. And then she decided that, you know, hey, I want to get better the last 2 years. And that meant working on weaknesses. And just like any of us do, whether, you know, we're 20 years old or we're 68 years old, um, there's all these little things that pop out. And when you're a master's athlete, you have to look at them a little bit different. I'm sure we'll get into that more. But she just started working on weaknesses, and I started helping her with little extra programming things. And then also just talking about how to sleep better. And it was surprising that that was a big issue at 68. You'd think that, you know, you'd kind of master that, or hopefully we had, but it's amazing how sometimes those things slip by us. So yeah, she basically decided in the last 2 years that she wanted to take it more seriously. And I helped her as much as I could, even, you know, asking for video reviews and things like that as much as possible. And the results were there. And to be honest with you, I was pretty convinced that she had the potential to make it to the games if she was committed, but both of our minds were blown that she was able to win the games. And it's just awesome. I feel really happy and blessed and really excited that she enjoyed the competition, because little story, she she was talking to us when she thought that she might be able to make to the games, and was like, I don't think I'm going to go. I don't want to go. It's it I don't think it's something that I want to do. I'm very nervous about it. It's just, she had this built up mindset that all of these other women were like these monsters, you know, that like she's going to show up and they're just going to be like trying to crush each other. And it was really cool that all of these other women were awesome, very cool people. And she, you know, walked away with tons of friends. So I'm sure I elaborated way more than what you wanted there, but
No, that's awesome. And I think another interesting thing for people to note is that was your mom's first in-person competition, correct? She
True,
never
yeah.
competed at any event before that, instead of the open in a local gym,
Correct.
which is amazing. You know, like when you talk about aging, I kind of like to almost think of like you have a chair, you have pillars underneath your chair. And for everybody, the pillars might be different. But for some, you alluded to one. Well, you alluded to all of them actually, except for one. But one was sleep. Like you have to have sleep. You've got to have good nutrition. You've got to have good sleep. And then the other one, it depends upon the type of person. But for like unhealthy lifestyle habits, whether that be like drinking or partying or like any of those kind of confounding things that are going to pull you down. And then I kind of like to use the seat of the chair as like your stress. And like if you have way too much stress, like your butt just falls through the chair, even if the legs stand up, so you're just stuck. You know, and if you have like all four of those legs down, if you have one that's missing, you can sort of teeter and totter until you get it back. But if you start with more than one of those pillars missing, that kind of brings about like you're unable to kind of train and exercise the way you'd like to, because the whole bottom falls out. And that's where injuries and illnesses and things like that happen. But with people like of the master's age, have you ever had, you know, conversations about kind of those types of pillars that they need to be solid in their foundation of their training?
Yeah, I have never explained it as eloquently as you just did, but those are exactly the same things that we talk about. And I think that it's interesting too, because you and I have even had a lot of great conversations over the years, especially when we were training together, about all of these things, whether they were masters athletes or not, just because we loved the sports performance and recovery side of things. So it's interesting to look at how it is different, but it isn't different when we're talking about masters athletes, because you and I just wanted to be getting better no matter what age we were at.
Correct.
So it is interesting to consider that as well.
Yeah, and I think I think it rings true for any age, but as people age, your physiology of your cells, it's harder to get them hydrated, it's harder to get them recovered. It's just everything has to be tweaked a notch. Like if I was 29 when I started CrossFit, like I could probably compete at a pretty high level and let a few of those fray ends go. But now as I approach closer to 40, they all have to be pretty locked in order for me to compete at a high level. And the older you get, I think the more locked in you have to be, because recovery is just simply harder in general. So when your mom was working on a lot of these, like getting better at her weaknesses, kind of also like to talk about like practicing, training, and competing. So did you have her doing a lot more practicing, training, or competing when she was working on these weaknesses?
Yeah, it's definitely practice. I mean, it's a lot of practice. And even, you and I, as we age, it's interesting to notice how much we need to practice more than we get to compete and train. But yeah, for her, it was that she's fortunate in that she has a pretty good cardiovascular endurance base just genetically. So she doesn't need to train that quite as much. And it comes easier to her, but it was the practicing thing that really stood out. It's like movement patterns, and every single day getting feedback on how, when you are practicing, is that breaking you down, or is it, something that you can do over and over again? So everybody has these nagging injuries and things like that. And I think that they become even more apparent as you get older, especially if you haven't taken care of your body, or, sometimes we just have genetic things that pop up. Like an example is my mom has a shoulder thing that just is always there, like no matter how much we have it treated and, how much we do for it, there's always a little bit of inflammation in the shoulder. And it comes back to like, we can't just like train that and nail it as much as we would like to, even practicing, so it's constantly getting the feedback on that. But like, I guess the point that I want to make is that for her to be a high level CrossFit athlete, she had a whole bunch of things that she needed to practice in order to get good at, a number of different things. But even with that practice at her age, that practice almost went into like the competing and the training. Does that make sense what I'm
Yeah,
saying there? So like,
it bled over a little bit.
yeah. So like, let's say that she needed to get better at her snatches, even with a PVC pipe. Sometimes we couldn't have her do it every single day with a PVC pipe because that would activate the inflammation in her shoulder. So it was a lot of feedback as well, even though you or I might think, oh, I could use a PVC pipe every single day, but that movement pattern had to be considered, even though it seemed like practice was moving into the training and the competing.
And when you were working with her, and did you kind of have to find her threshold for certain activities? Like you just said the snatch, like maybe you can only do X amount and then we had to take a day or two off. As people age, people tend to get stiffer upper backs, a lot of computer work, a lot of stuff like that. And shoulder to overhead also become a more challenging movement because they have to fight their bodies so much more. And so this is one where sometimes I give people that I coach, like, hey, we know you're good at 30 shoulder to overheads. Like today we can do 40, but then you have to make sure you're still good tomorrow and the next day. Like we almost have to like give them a threshold. And then like after that, it's like, now we switch to this because you've obtained that threshold already and no more, because we want you here tomorrow and not hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up another point that I wanted to talk about with you, is that warming up, like we warm up a lot, like so much so that like I get feedback a lot from warm-ups that like, man, the warm-up felt like a workout because there was just, I, there's nothing wrong with like the just getting the blood moving a lot in the joints that are going to be actively worked. And I've found that especially when working with, um, I think we have 3 masters athletes in the program right now that are like high level. So we have my mom, and then we have another guy that's a 72-year-old, just complete amazing ultra runner, like just uh, badass. I mean, super awesome dude. So, and then we've got a couple of others, but the warm up is something that we just blow out of the water. We get their bodies way more warmed up than what I would have usually done. And then coming back to what you were saying on like, you might have 40 reps in you. Something that's also hard to consider is that what if those 40 reps, or even like in my mom's case, they might be 20 reps of handstand push-ups, but she needs to be able to do the handstand push-ups because they might come up in a competition. So how many times per week can we do it? And then how many times, does that take away from the shoulder to overhead because we're practicing handstand push-ups, and all of these interesting things to consider. It's almost like a complete moving target, which is, it's cool, and it's a fun puzzle for people like you and I to consider as we're programming for people. But it is something that just needs to be considered, being super warm, and then how much volume can they take, and then how much it's, this movement pattern, whether it's upside down or pushing something over your head, still
Right.
going to fatigue you the same way.
And I think at that standpoint, a lot of communication between yourself and the person who either is like coaching you remotely or the person in front of you, just be like, yep, that's done. And just being able to hold yourself accountable to be like, yep, we're done with that movement. And that's being okay too. And I think sometimes as a master's athlete, particularly if you're in a class with all ages and you see people that are younger busting out certain things, or you think you should be lifting a certain weight. And actually how we program, we have 3 different levels of CrossFit. We go yellow, orange, red. And yellow in general would be considered kind of fitness. Orange is more of a performance, and red is like competition. But if you look at masters like 45 to 50 years plus, our yellow is really their performance level. And then our orange would be like, you're competing like pretty high up if you're hitting that. And so almost taking those things into consideration, I think are sometimes our masters athletes are like, oh, but I couldn't even do the yellow weight. I'm like, that's okay. That's okay. Because that's, we don't, we kind of program for the bell curve, and then we talk to people on the sides. But I think you just have to have that conversation with your coach and your staff, because you know your body more than they do because they don't live in it. And I think that's really important feedback for anybody coaching them. Yeah. Any other like kind of gems or things that you think are like pertinent for master that athletes to kind of like have this like aha moment, or this like I get it now that you've seen coaching them?
Yeah, I think 2 things. Number one, we kind of touched on it, but I don't think we can touch on it enough, is the sleep thing, and like completely optimizing sleep and being okay with sleeping more. So like I've, with my mom, especially as we ramped up some volume going into the games, obviously. And I was telling her, I was like, I need you to just stay in bed. I don't care if you're not feeling like sleeping, or you've got this routine throughout your whole life to pop up at 6 a.m. I'm like, I want you vertical. I want you like laying there, read a book, whatever, but I need you to like create this practice of like going to bed at 9 and then getting up at, 9, 10 hours later, maybe, like, and that's cool. And you're training, you have to like train recovery. So that's a big thing. And then I'm also like, sleep environment. Are you in a completely dark place? Is it a cold room? Is it, are you wearing an eye mask? Whatever you need to do in order to have those things to optimize your sleep. I mean, you and I are a big fan of the whoops because we want to optimize these things. So, optimizing, that's a big one. And then the other one that I wanted to talk about is protein consumption. So as you age, you need more protein. And sometimes it's even hard for your body to digest that protein. So we're really big on doing amino acids and things that don't necessarily have to go through the whole digestive system. And I've got my mom and my dad as well, who it also happens to be in the best shape that I've ever seen him in his whole life. Seriously. So it's awesome. And I've got these guys like chugging down, not like so much amino acids is like too much, but we set up a protocol and we make sure that they're hitting that. And they will tell me, they're like, I can't believe how much stronger I'm getting when I hit these protein numbers. It's just, I recover faster, I get stronger faster. And I think that that's something that can't necessarily be overlooked, because if you don't have those building blocks to recover, even if you're sleeping enough, your body's just not going to have that to put in there. So that is the other thing that we really focus on, not to mention that, we don't leave out the fats and the carbohydrates as well. But I feel like as seeing masters athletes, I'm always having to address that. All right, are you getting enough protein? And we do, as you do, I'm sure, like an analyzation of like how much they should have, but hitting that number, whew, big deal.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Definitely need to maybe look into that with some of our masters athletes a little bit more. Awesome. Well, Joe, I thank you so much. And I think, we could probably warrant a whole other discussion on nutrition, because I know you and I nerd out about that a lot. But thank you so much for kind of briefing with our masters athletes and some considerations for them moving forward. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Carla.